Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Strong Women series. My name is Maxine Higgins, and I'm so excited to have Elisa Torres with us. Today, she is a marketing professional, she's a philanthropist, and she's also a speaker. And I'm just so happy to have you here because we actually haven't seen each other in ages. How are you?
I am good, thank God. I moved to Singapore about a year ago for work, which has been quite the journey. And so I am coming into phase 2 of the COVID reopening in Singapore. So I'm very happy because I got to meet some friends this weekend and go out to eat and try to find some new level of normalcy in all this chaos. So yeah.
Wow, Singapore. Like, what is that like? And like, had you ever even been there before moving there for work?
No, I accepted the job and then I went to visit. I came to visit to find a place to live and stuff like a few weeks before. Before COVID, and even during COVID, it's been a great place. But before COVID, it is just very thriving, like the metropolis of Asia, and kind of like a mix of, I don't want to call it a New York City, but just like that vibrancy and a financial sector. A lot of multinational companies are here, and that's what brought me here because it's the main hub for Asia for a lot of companies, because it's kind of neutral territory between all of China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. So they've just done, from what I see, an amazing job building a beautiful place where companies can come and have their main offices and thrive. And it's also a really great place for tourism. So before COVID, I think I had been to 5 or 6 countries within like a few months. Because you're like 2 hours away, 4 hours away from Thailand, Vietnam, China.
Wow.
So it was really great. That was one of the big reasons I moved here, was for my career progression, but also be able to travel. So yeah, it was a bummer, what's happened with COVID, but I'm more than anything grateful that myself and my family are healthy. And
Absolutely.
I just had to shift my perspective and say, okay, well, God knew this was going to happen when I came here. So what does he have for me to do?
I can't even imagine like taking such a big leap like that, moving somewhere that like you completely just don't know, but it must be such an incredible adventure. And so thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. We actually know each other from church as well. We sort of like served on the same team, but not really. It was like the same team, but it was like separate.
Different groups.
So we actually didn't like talk a whole lot or like, know each other super well at church, which sucks. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I enjoyed watching you be a leader and watching you thrive. And when you birthed your Bravely Rise group, that was super cool. So I did see all of that goodness from the distance, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that we get to connect now. And so we're just going to learn a little bit about you, and it'll be the first time for me hearing a lot of this stuff too, so I'm excited about that. But I love starting off with just learning about people's names. I think they just carry so much weight and power. So tell me about your name. Do you love it? Do you like it? Do you hate it? What does it mean?
Yeah, I love my name. It's I'm named after my great grandmother, so my dad's grandma, and it actually means consecrated to God. It stems from the name Elizabeth in the Bible, and I definitely feel consecrated to the Lord in the sense of just over time, like where he stripped me from other things that would have brought me comfort, that you would by society's standards feel like you should have or have achieved, or like even being here 19 hours away from home with literally no one else. I couldn't even visit another person's home while we were here on lockdown, so it's like extremely strict. But I found that God has a way of just drawing me closer to him and being with me and being my best friend. And like when I wanted to collapse and like cry and like fall to pieces, and I do at times, his presence is just there. And I don't mean it in the cliche sense of like, oh, God is there. I mean, like when I was like going through it in the beginning of the lockdown, if it wasn't through prayer and like the Bible to encourage me, it would have been a very different period. So I feel that I've definitely live true to my name.
Yeah.
And I like it. I want when I eventually have kids, I want them to have strong, short names. Like, I feel like it's a strong name. It has a nod to my culture, relatively easy to say, but it is frustrating because people mispronounce it. In Asia, I get Eliza a lot, Alyssa, Elise, Alicia. So other than that, I like it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I was even asking you when I first started, like, how do you want me to say this? In English, in Spanish? Like, what is the right way? And like, we're gonna say this in Spanish, Elisa. Like,
Exactly.
um, that's awesome. I love that, consecrated to God. And I also love that you were able to have that kind of firm foundation to hold you during those times, you know. And I think I've been talking to a lot of people during the season, and I find that like people who are like grounded in their faith, you know, not that we're not experiencing health issues or scary times and things, but there is this comfort that's there,
Mhm.
sureness that's there. And so I think that's absolutely beautiful. Awesome. So let's get to know a little bit about you. Tell me about your journey with God. What has that been like?
Yeah, I was born into a Christian family, and my both my parents very fervently serve the Lord. Especially my dad is used very greatly by God through like the gifts of prophecy and revelations, dreams, gifts of healing. Um, my grandma has a gift of prophecy. So yeah, I definitely grew up with it like around me very extensively. It didn't become my faith, and I think Hilda said this on the other video I watched. It didn't become my faith until I went through a bad breakup in college, where I just realized like at that point how much my identity was rooted in what people thought of me and how much I struggled with insecurity. And I think I still do to a certain extent. I've come a long way after many years of therapy and growing in the Lord and challenging some thoughts that I've had toward myself. But that was for sure when I was like, I literally think I'm gonna die
Mm.
from going through this breakup. And that was because the Lord told me the person wasn't for me. And I had nothing else to go by but that. Like, he was a nice guy, he loved the Lord. And I was like, okay, God, like, I have no peace, and I'd rather be miserable and single than be in this relationship and not and be then it torn Lord about my relationship with God. Like, I
Yeah.
can't do that. So that was when I started to really seek the Lord. I was like 20, I guess. No, that's not true. 18 or 19 in college. And then I started to grow closer to God because I found that he is so close to the brokenhearted. Like, I've never prayed so hard in my life as when I've gone through a heartbreak or when I'm scared about something or fearful I have a big decision to make. And I found it to be true over and over again. And I feel like the biggest hypocrite because I never pray so hard except when I pray all the time, but pray like that, like God, and you feel his presence and response. And the fact that he doesn't just shoo us away, like, well, now you want to talk to me, or now you have a fervor, is just God's grace. And so he definitely was with me in that. And then I graduated college and I moved for work. Again, like, that was my first move, or the second one. I moved in college and after college to Ohio. And the same thing, I was like, oh, I'm sure I'm going to meet somebody. Like, you think you got to be 25 and married with 2.5 kids and the white picket fence. So that was the plan. And then in Ohio, I didn't meet anybody at all. And then I would say, this is what goes back to my name, consecrated to God. And then I would look up and be like, I swear God has me in a vacuum. Like, it wasn't like there were guys that I would like turn away or anything. It was just like no one. It was me and the Lord and then my friends. And so that had me like really connected in church, really connected in different connect groups, building a really good community of faith, and just growing. Like, I'm so proud of that, Elisa. And I'm so proud of myself today because I wasn't even 21 years old yet. I had moved to Ohio at 20. I was about to turn 21 for my full-time job. And I did it. And I look back, like, my best friend wrote me a card the other day and she was like, whoever would have thought like this would become your life, where she said a lot of things you do them with fear and trembling and anxiety, but you do them.
Yeah.
And that's the truest statement you could ever say about me. Like, people I get a lot of compliments, feel like, you're so bold, you're so inspiring, you're so this, but if you knew, like, even now I have butterflies in my stomach, like, I'm nervous to just talk with you, or if I launch something or try something new, like I always have anxiety. And I know there's like, even my dad has corrected me. It's like, no, God didn't give you a spirit of fear. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, but I have it all the time. So I just fight through it versus saying, well, I can't, if I have fear, that means there's a lack of peace, so I can't do it. Like, I think that's
Okay.
not true. Yeah, not true at all. And yeah, so from Ohio, I moved back to New Jersey, then I moved to Long Island for work, then I moved back to New Jersey, and then I moved to Singapore. And I guess those are big milestones in my life. They're driver of my career a lot of times, but it was because I was like following the leading of the Lord, taking chances, taking risks, trying new jobs, trying new positions, putting myself out there, but just keep growing. And then I got to see God's hand in my life. And like the big passion I have along the way, and I suppose this is kind of getting into maybe the topics we'll talk about later, but is to have excellence like in my work and in everything I do, but also to minister to as many people as possible about Jesus. And so that's been a big part of the growth and faith journey, is how do I articulate my faith? How do I share that versus just keeping it to myself? Ravi Zacharias was a huge, huge influence in my life. I saw Youth in Apologetics, but I need to watch it. I wept like you have not ever seen at watching his funeral, because that's, you know, that's the gospel. That for us to just keep it to ourselves and just worry about offending people and all that, like, is selfish. And so beyond just for me, God has challenged me over the past years, like, okay, what are you going to do in service of others? And that's really powerful. And so I think of Christine Kane, when that marked my life, when she said, you know, everybody wants to be over there and over there, and there is here. We're here now because what you do here is going to get you there. And everybody wants a platform, and everybody wants fame and glory and all these things. And she said, the way I started was cleaning a dirty gym. Like, they asked who wanted to clean the gym in Australia for youth, and I showed up, and look at, you know, where I am now. And that was a real self-check for me, because I did have a lot of those drivers before of, like, I would say I wanted to help people, but really in my mind, I really wanted like attention and fame kind of for myself. And over time, like, the Lord convicted me of that. And I think it's always a journey to grow in that, and our maturity of, you know, how the Lord is using us, that it's really all his glory. But then I kind of came to the realization of, like, you know what, Lord, that's fine. I'm just going to bloom where you planted me. And I was at Hillsong 5 years making coffee. For 5 years, like, faithfully just making coffee. And at the time, like, I didn't have the capacity to become a leader, even though I had been asked to be one. I'm like, I can faithfully commit to this. I will be here every Sunday, or as many Sundays as possible. And that's, you know, that is important, and that is okay. And then all the time being fed and being prepared for the next things that he was going to bring me, you know, kind of to do. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, there were so many things in there. I'm like, I'm trying to write down notes and like not look down at the same time. I'm like, ooh, this is good. This is good. No, thank you for just being open and sharing. And I think there's, you know, a lot to kind of what you said that I kind of want to go back to before we jump into the next question. But just, you know, there are a couple statements. One, just talking about that idea that you have for your life, that it's going to look a certain way, that, you know, by 25, I'm going to be married and I'm going to have the kids. And when that doesn't work out, like, where do we go? How do we feel? What do we do in that state, you know? And then I love what you were just talking about, maturity, like understanding that maturity of where you are, of where you're going. Yeah. And I just love what you said also about fear, because I'm similar to you, that I do everything kind of fearful, like this small like anxiety kind of before I do anything. And again, I get the same thing, like people are like, oh, you just jump out there and you're not scared. I'm like, no, I'm scared all the time. I'm questioning stuff all the time. But I think that is that boldness in the faith to just like jump out anyway. So you do it scared anyway. And I love that you said that, because I think that also our yes opens up to more of God. Every time that we trust and say yes, he gives us more. We get to learn more about him. We get to see another side of him. So love that you said that.
I empathize with people that say, like, I've always had this burning desire in me to have my own business, like since I was younger. And I remember there was this entrepreneur group at our church, and there was an older gentleman who was so lovely and always like would believe in me and coach me and inspire me. And I would say, but I'm scared. And he was like, well, you just have to do it. And he meant really well. But for some people, you don't even know. Like for me, I didn't even know what the it was. And I didn't even know that what was really holding me back was the crippling anxiety of what people thought about me.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to like it until I started going to therapy. And so for some people, the step is that, or the step is finding the unforgiveness in your heart. The step is doing the like things maybe in your personal life or in your social circles that God has called you to do, or within your family, that will start to release you to step into the other things he's called you to do. Right? Because the word says, if you have unforgiveness in your heart, don't come pray to me, go apologize to your brother or your sister. And so I can empathize with the person that's like, but I don't even know what it is. Like, I'm so crippled. And that will look like many years of therapy for me first. And then us talking, and it was a Christian therapist, and then giving me book recommendations to read that helped give language to what was happening, and that I was very scared of vulnerability. And then I could figure out, and then I knew what I was scared of. So I was like, okay, at least the fear didn't go away, but now it's disarmed.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people to really examine your thoughts. You just feel that you have this scary feeling, so you don't even want to go look at what it is because you're so scared. Just follow that first before you think of like, how am I going to launch the business or launch a podcast or all of these things? Because that's probably not really what's scaring you.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's so accurate. And I think, fear does come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And so understanding what it is that you're afraid of is really helpful. But it's also like, in addition, like everything is steps, right? No one ends up at the end, like they just woke up and now we're here. Everybody has to take those little steps that lead to where you want to be or where God is calling you to be. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you feel like God has put on your heart in terms of your passion, your mission. And I know you started talking about it a little bit before, but if you can just like expand, what does that actually look like in your life?
Yeah. The mission for me feels like it keeps evolving, but the core has always been young women and girls, and how I can be a role model to them, be a resource that can help remove obstacles or help them see that those obstacles are not really there, that maybe they do feel are there, or that they have the power to overcome them. And the way that came to be is actually very specifically with anti-human trafficking. When I was like 22, 23, when I finally moved back to Long Island to work, I remember reading this horrific article about human trafficking, and it was the first I had heard about it. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, this is a real thing. Like, there's girls enslaved right now. Like, and I felt God tug on my heartstrings about that. And I was like, not today. Like, I just felt like if I really look at this, then I'm going to have to do something. And this is bigger than me. And I can't. First of all, I just got out of poverty myself, Lord, and I'm going to travel and enjoy my money that I'm making with my corporate job. And so, no. And the Lord kept over time bringing it to my remembrance. And then I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in Newark. It was actually a crisis shelter for 18 to 21-year-olds. And that was where I started to inform my perspective of what the issue was. And that's the other pearl I would give to people, is like, okay, human trafficking is this huge mega thing. Like, there's nothing you feel you could ever do, but it's happening in every community, and especially in poor communities. And so that was like an easy thing to do, relatively speaking. Like, I called up, I went to orientation, and they were like, well, we need people to teach them cooking lessons or to teach them fitness classes. And I'm like, well, if you don't want me to burn the place down, I think it's better that I do the fitness classes. So I just started teaching them kickboxing, like a cardio kickboxing that you would do at the gym. And then I would take little scriptures and little snack bars, and like then I would sit there and I would tell them my story. Like, I grew up, I was poor in Jersey City, and we were homeless at one time, and all those things. And I would minister scripture to them, I would pray with them, and it started out as like a kickboxing class, right? Which then ultimately led to me going on a mission trip, which led to me getting a big platform in my company where I got to do a TEDx talk about human trafficking, which led to fundraising $20,000 for 821, which put me on a platform in my job that sent me to Singapore because they started to see me as a more and more as a leader. The fact that I could speak in front of 1,500 people, right? It all, and if I never took the first step of going to the gym to go volunteer, like all of that would have never unraveled. But to go back to my point before about maturity and humility, when I got to the gym in Newark was when I started to hear Christine Kane talk about all the stuff where she was saying, like, would you be content to just go clean the gym at a place? Like, is that okay for you? And when Bobby Houston would say, you want to save the world, is your block saved? Like, do they know Jesus? And that I had this moment where I said, Lord, if I die and the rest of my life, all I do is come to this gym and teach these kids, it will be enough for me. And I meant it with every fiber of my being, and I let it go. And I do not want to be those cliche people like, I let it go, but it's really what happened. Like I finally was like, you know what? I love New Jersey. I love being with my family. It's fine, God. Like, it's fine. And I think sometimes that's what he most wants is a willing heart and an obedient heart that says, like, I know this is going to cost me. Like, I do not want to drive to Newark after I've worked all day and like deal with these kids that are going to sass me and I'm like intimidated by and all, like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it because that could have been me. Like, that was big reality I had was like, if your family lost everything, had no money, were sleeping on the floor in the projects of my grandma's house. So like poor helping poor, like poverty helping poor, and you think you're better than somebody? That to me broke me.
Yeah.
When I sat across from these girls that would tell me their story of how they had been trafficked or they had to sell themselves because they didn't have money for food. When you see the lack of opportunity, which is very relevant to what's happening today with this racism conversation in some of these communities, we have to put our hands to the plow. I don't care. Again, I'm going to borrow Christine Kane. If you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, if you're an Enneagram 1, 3, or 9, it is your calling to put your hand to the plow, even if it is on the smallest scale of that volunteering, of hosting a little Bible study for your community, whatever it is. Like, we need less critics and we need more people working and doing the,
Say that one more time.
We need more people working and doing the work. And I will quote Carl Lentz, who says, if you're not helping,
you ain't helping. Talk to me a little bit more about, I know that you just launched a website, so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the journey has morphed where, like, at first I was like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to open a business. And then within that business, I'll be able to create jobs, because I saw the big problem I thought with anti-human trafficking work was you want to rescue these girls and men and boys that are enslaved, but they don't have employment opportunities. Oh. So that was kind of my initial plan. And then I did start a business. It was a food business, pasteles, shout out to my grandma.
I've had some.
Oh, that's great. And so I started that and I thought, okay, like, this could be cool. I'm going on a tangent, but I'll answer the website question, but it's important because that was what I thought was the answer. And then I was like, I hate this so much. And I was getting up at 3 a.m. to go to farmers markets and working my grandparents and my mom to the bone. My mom would come out of the kitchen and like her neck was like stuck. I had free labor. Working to make my food and stuff. And so I really hated that. And then I started to get more of the opportunities at work with the speaking engagements and things. And I work for an amazing, amazing company that gives me the opportunity to do these kinds of things. And so I was like, if I got this company, which is like the largest healthcare company in the world, if let's say that I was a speaker or had my own business and I got them as a client, I would be like, guys, I landed this company, like, oh my God, they're my client. And then I'm like, but you work inside of a company with 100,000 employees. So why don't you treat them as your audience? And why don't you figure out what you could do already where you are, where you have an audience, where you have people that have money and resources to contribute to causes? Like, why are you despising the day of small beginnings? You have to shift perspective. And so that's when I let go of like my own business thing. And I'm not saying it won't come up later again, but I really love my career and I'm thriving here. Yeah. And so I thought, what else could I be doing? And a lot of women, young women, started to come to me for advice all the time. I have one-on-ones multiple times a week with people asking, what do they do? And I realized how much they struggle, like I have, with self-doubt and feeling like they're not enough and being intimidated. And so that's how that got birthed, was like, well, I guess I could just do a little website and then we'll see, maybe I'll blog about it. And then it just, typical Elisa fashion, turned into this like big project. And I launched it earlier this year, and to really great, I got so many subscribers. I didn't think that many people have subscribed or visited the site. And so it's called elisaspeaks.com. And on there, the whole premise is to help give a point of view of women that are advancing in their careers and doing it while we're on the journey. Yeah. Because a lot of the thought leaders in corporate, in the corporate setting, like Sheryl Sandberg and Melinda Gates, have already arrived.
Right.
And so for them, it's a very different perspective. Also, they're in their 50s and 60s, and it's not the way that it is now, which you would like to think is easier for us now. In some ways it is, in some ways it's not, because now there's active conversation where people will actively disagree versus passively disagree with the fact that you can be a good leader as a woman. And so it's to share that journey.
Yeah.
And also was to give me the opportunity to share what I'm doing. So hopefully it'll give me access to other speaking opportunities and things like that, like this one.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. And so much about kind of using what you have in the moment and right where you are, like absolutely 100%. I love with your website too, that your focus is on women who are on the journey in so many ways. That's exactly what Strong Women of God is. It's like women who are on their way, not necessarily those who've arrived. Although we'll interview those too, but yes. It's really just a space of like, there is so much, I think, in our culture, there's so much language and loudness and exposure of people who have arrived. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it gives us this false perception that in the workings of it, that nothing is happening. And so when you hear other people's journey, you hear other people's stories, the steps that it takes, that the fact that even though you're speaking, you're doing these large speaking engagements and you have this website and you have this great job, that you still struggle with doubt and anxiety. That is freeing for somebody else who is sitting there saying like, I can't start, I can't begin, because it kind of just helps remove all of that. And I know for me, I don't know how you are about this, but a lot of the things that I went through, it was very difficult for me to climb out of if I didn't see someone else do it. So I always kind of said, but they're not like me. Yeah, they did it, but they're not like me. And so I was always looking for representation of someone. And even like, I think about something just like my debt-free journey. Part of why I didn't start for so long was because I didn't know anybody with my level of debt, in my level of circumstances, in my level. So when I got connected to the Financial Peace and Dave Ramsey world and realized like, oh my gosh, there's all of these other people and they're doing it. I can do this. I can be activated in this space. And so what you're doing, it matters so much, because people will hear your story, they'll hear where you came from, and it will free somebody up. It will give somebody permission to take whatever their next step is. So I love all of it. Yes, 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 yes. And also just loving, representation is not something that you talked about a ton, but like even within your name, like the fact that I can look at you and understand, see your name, and hear you, see you, and know that you're a Latina, like that's also a space that you're occupying that not too many women have the opportunity, unfortunately, yet from minority cultures and in these spaces. So you are killing it, and thank you for that representation. I love it. If you were to just kind of sum up maybe like a life lesson, one life lesson that you could think of, what do you think that would be?
Trust the process. So in my career, I have had great opportunities, right, to get advancements, and to be on this assignment is very rare, not only for a Latina, but in general, to be on the in the type of program that I'm in my job, to be here to accelerate my career. But then there was a lot of setbacks or jobs that I felt like I didn't get access to. I had delays in jobs that I wanted. Two very specifically, and however, one of them was really touching because I got to reconnect with a friend. We had met when I first started like 12 years ago, and then we had lost touch because we were in different parts of the US, and then we started to work together as managers together. And then she unfortunately came down with stage 4 cancer, which is terminal. And she passed away, 33 years old. But I forever will be grateful for that delay or that shift in the journey of where I thought I needed to be, because I got to walk that journey with her. We had very, very beautiful moments before and during while she had the cancer. I'm friends with her husband and her daughter, you know, have continue on now in her legacy and her family. We had really in-depth conversations about spirituality and faith. And that to me was a big smack in the face of God saying, like, it's not about you and your timeline. I think so much, especially in Christianity, we name it and claim it and more money and more prosperity and more all these things. And it's like, that's the least of what Jesus hung on a cross and died for you for. And I tried to, over time, undo that thinking in my mind of like, yes, I'd rather have money than be poor, of course. But that's not the purpose, and it's not always promotion, and it's not always gain for yourself. It's, if he said I needed to go do that job for 18 months or 3 years or 5 years for that, or the rest of my career, that would have been worth it for those moments I shared with her. Yeah. And so just don't miss what he's doing in that season. Like, I could have sat here and pouted because I hit COVID and I couldn't travel. And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. What else is he going to show me, and what can I gain in this season during this time? So that would be my lesson I keep learning over and over again.
Well, thank you so much for that. And hey, I always end with just like, if you have any recommendations for us, any book recommendations, podcasts you're listening to, a show that you're watching, anything you think we should know about.
Yeah, so with the conversation that's happening right now with racism, which has torn me to pieces, being on my own learning journey, realizing like, because I was Latina, I was like, oh, I know what the Black community is going through. Like, we're oppressed together. Mm-hmm. And that closed my ears to actually listening and realizing like the severity. And so for one, it's been a very reflective time for me to repent, to realize that I don't know, and to say, okay, how can I layer this into now the work I'm doing, which before was something I focused on in my job, like diverse recruiting. But now it's going to be a more fiery passion. Now I have the language for it. And the reason I say it is I'm reading a great book, which is How to Be an Anti-Racist. Because a lot of times I think we know something is wrong. Like, I knew in my job the way that someone looked up and down at a Black person or expected them to be perfect because they were Black was wrong. And sometimes I spoke up, and honestly, sometimes I didn't. And I think the majority of the times was because I didn't know, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to just say, like, you're being racist. Yeah. And maybe now I'm really excited because this book is such a great tool and resource that you can use, because it gives you language and helps explain in a way that's not accusatory of anyone. It's just exposing the systems and the policies that created and shaped the world we live in. Yeah. So that's one. And then a second podcast, a second resource on a similar topic is Hillary Rushford. She's an entrepreneur and an influencer, and she did a really good podcast talking about how, with this topic, how people feel overwhelmed, and some people feel they want to go back to their prior life, right? And she was asking, and she's a white woman, asking people please not to do that, and that a productive thing you can do, instead of feeling like, for me with human trafficking, right? I'm like, now I have to worry about human trafficking and racism. Like, I can't do it all. And we can't do it all, but her point was, if you are passionate about education, if you're passionate about whatever your thing is, add a layer of race on top of that. Okay, so now how can you help solve that problem? And now we look at it differently through the layer of race. Yeah. So I loved her, that she did a podcast, Hillary Rushford, on that topic, and I think it'll help people find like, okay, how do we carry this forward so it wasn't just a moment? Yeah. So that's what I've been spending my time on, is learning more. Yeah.
So good. And thank you for that, and for that acknowledgement, and for understanding and learning. And I know, I'm mixed as well, so I'm Black and Latina, and it has always been a really difficult line for me to walk. Because we have our own issues within our communities. Mm-hmm. And for so long, it has been overlooked and silenced. So it's not that it hasn't existed. It's not that it's not been my experience. It's just, it's not been welcome. And it's a very fine line to walk with. And it does get you know, it's particularly difficult speaking with, you know, Latinas or Latino people or my family about race because they don't necessarily get it in its fullness,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because there's still a layer of privilege, you know, not
Yes.
that you don't experience racism, not that, you
Yeah.
don't experience a thing, but there are some things that you can turn a blind eye to. And so it is difficult. So I think resources like the ones that you mentioned are so important. And I love what you said about, again, like, keep doing what you're doing, just add another layer and making sure. And, you know, I was reading this or looking at this picture, this meme, and it was just talking about how, like, that our systems, America is so racist that you can protest racism and America thinks that we're protesting America. And that
Yes.
has just messed with my mind completely, because now I'm looking at all of these systems and I'm saying, wow, like, we can protest something that's wrong and you think that we're protesting the human being or the person
Mm-hmm.
altogether, and that's just not the case. um, Even though, you know, our language wants to make it divisive, our pride wants to, you know, I think that the language wants to make it divisive, and you know, we as Christians have to understand. I think we need to do a better job of just knowing who Jesus was and what he stood for and
Mm-hmm.
who he spoke up for. um,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that until we don't do that as Christians, I think we're just in a really, really bad shape. And so I have been encouraged by, you know, people who have been saying, you know what, just because I admit that there's a problem within the system, it doesn't mean that I'm betraying my own race or my own
Yeah.
identity. You know, that
Yeah.
those can be two separate things, that you can be thoughtful about someone else's life that doesn't look like your own, and it doesn't invalidate your own life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you and thank you for kind of saying those things. We're going to close. If people want to reach you, obviously they're going to go to your website, elisaspeaks.com, and we'll put a link in there. But do you want to throw in any other way that we can contact you?
Yeah, that's the best way I have. You can subscribe to my newsletter and you can message me through there or on LinkedIn. I'm the most active from a corporate standpoint on LinkedIn. So I'd love if you connect with me there as well.
Awesome. Elisa, thank you so
You're
much. This has
welcome.
been incredible, and you've said so much that I know is going to be helpful to so many women that are watching this right now. So thank you for your time. Thank you everybody for joining. Don't forget to hit subscribe on the channel and follow us at strongwomen_of_God on Instagram. Until next time, take care.